Pour écouter cette session en français, veuillez cliquer en bas de votre écran sur l'onglet Interprétation et sélectionner le drapeau français.
Hello, bonjour.
Barry Saleho.
On behalf of Decay Africa,
the African Center for Cities,
Our Future Cities,
Red Cross Crescent Climate Center, and partners,
we're excited to welcome all of you
to the Rise Africa 2022 Action Festival.
Rise Africa has been growing since 2020
as a platform for thinkers,
doers,
and enablers
committed to inspiring action for sustainable cities.
This year's theme is
creativity.
For me, this means blending skills to be able to communicate the climate change complexity in rapidly urbanizing cities.
I think we have such untapped potential in Africa when it comes to creativity.
I love the idea that we need to create space to be creative. I think so often we rush into trying to act immediately, and creativity is a good reminder to sit back and to really tap into the capacities we have.
I think agency is finding ways of giving power back to people, to groups, to young people, especially on a continent where it's a very young population.
The value, the inputs from the youths, people who are considered inexperienced have valuable contribution, and they're really taking that into consideration.
I think what agency means to me is change from the ground up.
The importance of urgency is the recognition of the past and the recognition that we've lost time.
Urgency is about acting now to build more inclusive, productive, and resilient cities.
Is this need to creatively redesign and unlearn and explore new ways of thinking.
The festival is hosting 33 sessions
with 135 provocateurs
from across Africa and the world.
Every session aims to show new ideas,
showcase ongoing action,
and launch new initiatives, bringing participants together
to chart a new route forward.
We hope that the festival program will inspire you.
At the festival, we encourage you to showcase your business and projects,
build lasting partnerships,
unleash your creative potential,
commit to sustainable action.
Rise Africa is about translating ideas into action. What actions are you going to commit to this festival?
Before the session begins, it is important to note that you're being recorded.
And by participating, you are given the consent to be recorded.
All recordings will be available on the program page after the festival.
Creative expression is vital for creating new futures for our cities.
And so we invite you to enter this session in the spirit of creativity and dreaming.
Je vis avec un mal dont je ne suis pas le porteur. Je vis avec un mal qui me donne de l'espoir. Atteint de l'albinisme, déficience intellectuelle, handicapé physique, malentendant, malvoyant, je suis dédaigné par la population. Exclusion, désaffiliation, je suis exclu de la société. Ils disent que je suis différent d'eux. Discrimination, marginalisation, je vis en marge de la société. Je suis la risée de la société. Stigmatisation, ségrégation, je proteste contre les travers de la société. Je refuse ce mode de vie. Inclusion, insertion, nous promouvons l'alphabétisation, l'éducation inclusive, l'accès aux infrastructures, l'accès aux services sociaux pour les personnes vivant avec un handicap, la création d'un système distributif pour réduire la pauvreté, la reconnaissance du travail non rémunéré, la réduction du chômage à longue durée, la valorisation de l'égalité pour toute la communauté. Je suis différent d'eux. Le handicap n'est pas une fatalité. Sachez que mon handicap a fait de moi une bombe à épanouissement. Sachez que mon handicap a fait de moi une bombe à épanouissement.
Lauren Arnza, and I'm with ICLEI Africa, and I'll be moderating today's session, and hopefully with a lot of interaction from all of you with us. Just to give you some framing of today, so as was described, our African cities experience an array of pressures, drivers, and changes that shape the quality of our lived experiences. And these compelling causes and effects that give our cities a dynamic and emergent quality are almost at best captured through photography and storytelling. So we hope today's session, following a problem posting pedagogy, which is a form of teaching and learning together, using the photographs to evoke your thoughts, experiences, and feelings about urban Africa and what we experience and what we know, and what we hope to see in our future. So today we'll be using a series of photographs submitted through the RISE Africa 2022 photography competition. And along with the judges with the competition and some discussants who we will introduce shortly, we invite you to share and explore the selection of submissions and reflect on any insights that you may gain from these. We will start with our judges an initial reflection on the generally in photography and the submissions before we go into the mural board. Before we start, I just want to, we will go out into breakout rooms, and we just want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to express themselves. So in this, if we could ask everyone to rename yourself with your name and your preferred language at the end. So either EN or FR after your name, so that we could try to divide people into groups where there will be translation available where needed. So I'll just give you a moment to do that, please. To rename yourself, there's an option that says more next to your name, and then an option that says rename. Great. If you have any trouble with this, please let us know in the chat, and we can assist you. So kicking us off today, I'd like to invite the judges from the photography competition to reflect on just in general photography, and then respond to kind of what themes they were seeing coming out of the submissions and the photographs that they have viewed over the past week. So maybe in this order, Rehab, Katumba, and Chris, if you could turn on your videos and share with us your insights.
Hi, Lauren.
Hi.
Should I start?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, great. So hello, everyone. It's really great to be here. Thank you for the introduction, Lauren. Well, let me start by saying that I'm really honored first to be judging this competition. I've always been a huge advocate of insider stories, and to see this amount of work coming from Africa by African photographers is great, and it's huge, and it's deeply needed. We need to make sure that we are telling our own stories and our stories are being heard, and that there are huge talent within Africa and it deserves its recognition. So coming from an industry that has long, seen the photographer being, coming from, from the West, from Western countries and parachuting onto Africa and telling stories, it has been really, really difficult and really frustrating to see the amount of stories that are being told by, outsiders. So seeing these insider stories has been really refreshing and really motivating to look forward to the future of visual storytelling and photography. I've been really struck by how many of the shortlisted entries have shown this interaction between the people and the cities, between the people and the land, which is amazing. It creates context. It creates, it humanizes a lot of issues in regards to, climate change, in regards to economy within Africa, and in regards to human connections as well. And in particular, the winning story, I'm not sure if it's announced or not yet, but the winning story has been it's both creative, but also extremely deep in regards to how we need to connect, whether people to land or people to cities or people to one another, to different generations. And I think once this connection happens, we'll be really able to develop our cities within Africa and really going to elevate ourselves into something that's for a better future, hopefully. I don't know what else to say.
Thank you so much. There's so many rich things that came out of your expressions. We will come back to you towards the end as well, after we've had our breakouts. But thank you so much. Kutumba? Maybe while he tries to join us, maybe we can go to Chris so long.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I mean, I echo the same things as Rehab and being really honored to be a part of this project. I think it's incredibly important, and I'm excited to explain some of my thinking about photography. I think trying to sum up my worldview on photography is quite a thing, on why it's such an enduring, evocative, and accessible medium. But I think if anything, one phrase that I encountered a couple of years ago really gets to the heart of why I think that especially today, photography is such a powerful and important means of inquiry. And that frame is, sorry, that phrase is nothing about us without us. The phrase was first coined by disability rights activists in South Africa when they were speaking about how people with disabilities needed to be included in key policy about their lives. And in my work, this phrase has become something of a mantra to me. It's a reminder to foreground the voices and the stories of people affected by the issues that we cover. It's also a reminder that the very act of photography is an enactment of this value. I think it applies to me as I document issues that affect me, like LGBTQ rights. It's a reminder that my perspective is not just welcomed, but it's also key to telling our own stories on our own terms. And in some way, to me, every time a photographer shares an image, they're saying nothing about us without us, nothing without me. But I think the phrase also applies to the right that the public has to access visual documentation about our world, that what happens in our world, in our countries, in our cities has to do with us, and that we have a right to know about it, to see ourselves in it and to be a part of those conversations. It's especially true today where we have the technology of mobile phones and social media, and so therefore millions more citizens can document and share their perspectives. This phrase has never let me down. It's followed me throughout my career, and engaging with the images that you see on this mural is no different. What struck me while we were spending time with these images is the unique role that photography can play in conversations about policy and development. What we see in these images are stories about cities. It's how we live in them, love in them, commune, eat, sleep, work, buy, sell, ride, walk, breathe, grow. These images tell stories beyond statistics, beyond the graphs and the maps. It reminds us that it's people who live in cities. The one image that really drove this home for me is called Urban Decay. You can find it on the mural a little bit later. It's on sort of the top right. It shows a major central station in Lagos. And as the photographer says, pollution in this place is alarming. The canal is filled with plastic bottles, nylons, rubber plastic bags, etc. The urgency of this place to be cleared is glaring. Content-wise, the image is dominated by the concepts of litter and infrastructure. But on the left-hand side of the frame, there's this woman. And you can see by her face that she has some thoughts about the space that she inhabits. You cannot look at this photo and not be reminded that it's people who live in cities. When it comes to development, there's so much that happens about us, without us. We're not often in the room with decision makers as they create policy that governs our lives, but we're here. We're on the streets, we're on social media, we're in the community spaces. Photography creates the sparks for conversation, the space to celebrate, to criticize, document, question, and share. And photography is still one of the most striking and effective ways striking, effective, and timeless ways we have to do all of this. Lastly, I think the phrase "nothing about us without us" applies to how we remember our lives tomorrow, for the archive and for our collective histories. In the past, I mean, as Rehab was saying earlier, so many people have been left out and erased from our visual archives, which there's so much to be done to still fill in those gaps and to ensure that we do better in the future. But for the sake of tomorrow and yesterday, I think projects like this are so important to record what Africans think about their own cities and to put these insights into the gaze of powerful people and essentially to tell Africa's stories on their own terms. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. So before we move on to the next part of the session, I just want to remind everyone who's joined us a little bit later to please indicate your language preference after your name. So if you could rename yourself and either put EN for English or FR for Français at the end, please let us know so that we can assign you to in a breakout room with the correct translation available. Thank you. So before we go onto the mural, I just want to briefly give our discussants an opportunity to say hello, turn on their cameras, and briefly introduce themselves. So Ditsaboho, David, and Funmi, and maybe Paul, I think, if he's still here. If we could just say hello. And if you wish to share a reflection, you're welcome to at this stage. But we will dive more deeply after the mural into your reflections.
All right, thank you, Lauren, and good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, wherever you're joining from, or good evening. My name is Diteboho Machele. I am Program Manager, Sustainable and Resilient Cities at the South African Cities Network. I'm quite excited to be part of this session. I have a background in architecture and sustainable development, and I'm looking forward to looking through the photographer lenses. And yes, we'll talk more about our reflections in the breakout rooms, Lauren, but just to say the creativity already speaks for itself. Thanks.
David, you may go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, I'm David Maddox. I live in New York City, and I lead something called The Nature of Cities, an organization that's specifically interested in the kinds of things that we're talking about here, the idea of storytelling, alternative visions of how to put cities together that melds planning and science and art and creativity. And so I'm really pleased to be here and thrilled at the idea of a storytelling-based urban planning approach.
Thanks, David. Funmi?
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, wherever you are on the planet. My name is Funmi, and I anchor the rights-based approaches work of ICLEI on the region. Background in law and in human rights protection, and I come in from the angle of an equity lens and looking at photography. I also have a personal interest in the arts and in photography generally, and just looking at those photographs and thinking from quite a different lens and thinking, is this equitable, or are these photos telling a different story that we need to hear beyond what we see on the surface. So I'm very excited to be in the panel and in this session and to just bring on board a different kind of lens. Great to meet you all.
Thank you. And lastly, Paul? Okay, Paul will join us a little bit later. Cool. So now I will share my screen with the mural, and my colleagues will share the link in the chat below. You will just be requested to put your name, or you can join as an incognito person. But it's whiteboard sharing facility where we've posted in groups a selection of photographs from the photo competition. In the sort of blue blocks are the titles and the yellow ones are the contributors. So the best way, well, there are two ways in which you can navigate this board. One is using your mouse and being able to kind of just scroll in or out. Sorry, that's very quick. Or the other way is on the your right-hand side of your screen. There is a navigations pane where you can either click the plus to zoom in or the minus to zoom out, as well as click within, there's a yellow square to move yourself around the board. So if we just navigate to the top in purple, there's some instructions on how to add comments onto the board. And if you wish, you're welcome to test within this purple area. So the best way to do it is if you double click, and the block will come out quite small, but you can drag to make it bigger or zoom in, and you can start typing and it will add whatever you are, whatever you wish to contribute to the board. So if we can just take a moment to allow everyone to get onto the mural. If you have any issues, please let us know in the chat. So I will pause here briefly before we continue. If you are having any issues, also feel free to unmute yourself and just let us know. We can try to assist.
Please, can you post the link again for me?
So before, without hearing any kind of questions or statements, we will break into breakout rooms in a moment. So just before we start, I just want to kind of remind you. So our aim for today is that if each group you could start wherever you wish on the mural board and navigate through as many of the groups of photos as you can get through within our 30 minutes. And the idea is for the group to stop and reflect on initially what the photos are evoking for you, what is powerful, what comes out in relation to your experiences of an African city or your hopes for our future African cities. And then in reflecting, giving everybody kind of an opportunity to add your thoughts and add your comments. And then from there, looking at what do these experiences or thoughts mean for urban development, practice and policy. So it's really an opportunity for sharing, an opportunity for learning or unlearning, and sharing your experiences of African cities. If you do have any questions, we are available on chat. I assume everyone has had the opportunity to get onto the mural. So in saying that, enjoy, and we will see you in 30 minutes. If our team could open the breakout rooms. Cool. I hope you guys enjoyed that what felt like very brief session for us, at least in my group. So now I'd love to offer our 4 discussants an opportunity to share some of the insights or some of their reflections from their group discussions. I think there might have been some overlap, but you're welcome to offer your own reflections, even if you were in the same groups. So maybe if we start with Diteboho.
All right, just trying to unmute myself. Thank you, Lauren. So I'll start with the banana market photographs. And there was an agreement around how vibrant and colorful this part of the city is. And from an outsider, it might look chaotic, but there's order in the sense that everyone knows their place and they know what they need to be doing and milling around doing. There's a real focus on women and the role of women as the backbone of economies in our cities, as breadwinners, as people who make sure that there's bread on the table in a lot of instances, but also around the aspects on planning our cities to cater for women and their needs, looking at urban safety, looking at the use of public space and how that should cater for these different needs, and not also looking at a Eurocentric way of planning, but designing our cities, our African cities, to cater for the activities that actually happen there, and making sure that our urban fabric responds to that. Yes, thanks, Lauren.
Thanks, Tituoho. David, would you like to offer us some of your insights?
Sure. What a remarkable collection of pictures. It's really inspirational to see so many different points of view, and that's the phrase I would want to lean into in my reflection. The idea of points of view. We often think of art and artistic approaches are documentation or observation of lots of aspects of our society. As was mentioned about gender and roles and how space is used. And in that sense, one of the things that came up in our group a couple of times was the idea of photography as a form of inquiry, a form of research. And I think my reflection would be this. Often we talk about art as somehow being a response. When we put art and things like urban planning, public planning together, we often talk about art as being reflective somehow of that urban planning, and that the planners create these spaces, and then the rest of us respond to them. We live in them, we document them, we show them, and I'm curious about, could we create a forum in which the artistic approaches, imaginative approaches, creative approaches, like art, we used it as a research lens that the planners would come to as a sense of primary data. That is, that the photographers wouldn't be responding to the urbanity that has already been created by the so-called professionals, but we would actually use the photographers and create forums in which the planners come to, in a situation like this, look at the pictures and ask, what can we learn from the pictures that would inform our future planning, rather than the other way around. Let's the spaces that we can see in front of us and that the artists have shown us through an imaginative lens on which they've imposed some values. Have the urban planners come learn from those pictures, rather than dropping urban planning on us and results in those things. And one of the examples would be, many examples in the pictures, but one of the examples would be the picture of the train station. I can't remember where, I think it was Lagos, the train station in Lagos. And there was one of the things that struck me about that picture, which was ought to be important data for a planner, is that all of the garbage and the refuse was down the middle of the picture. The artist made the composition of the picture for all of the disuse of space was the thing that was centered in the picture, and the people were off to the side. The infrastructure was looming over everyone else. And there's an important story there for every urban planner about how we shouldn't be planning the cities. And the urban planners ought to be learning from these pictures rather than just saying, oh, we planned it and other people can live in it. I would like us to insist even, that the people who are creating our cities in professional contexts, like urban planners, start to look for data outside their professions and into the streets. And photography would be a beautiful way to do that.
I 100% agree. I've been thinking a lot about how to include this kind of format into how we start a project, really experiencing a place before we even start to put pen to paper in anything we do, whether it's design or policy or practice, and having those lived experiences before changing the way we want to see them.
Yeah, there's another ICLEI project that takes that kind of approach, the walking through the cities project, where you go for a walk out in the city or whatever the infrastructure is, and you take the walk with artists and ecologists and planners, and you experience the place together and talk about it through that experience. It's not something that happens in a room. It actually happens in situ.
In this post-COVID world, let's hope we see more of that. Before I continue, Funmi, can we hear your thoughts?
Thank you very much, Lauren, and everybody. And actually, I just want to kick off from David's discussion on the way we approach planning and the way we approach much of the work we did. And I'm referring back to the banana picture, the banana market pictures, because that was very, very striking for us in our group. And I think one of the major conversations that came up there was how African cities are planned and how many planners today want to impose Eurocentric views on how African cities should be, or what the ideal African city should look like. And we said that if you look at the aerial shots of many of those pictures, the immediate reaction is to see chaos. But in the midst of that chaos, there's also order. And maybe we need to begin to rethink our planning approaches. And maybe we need to begin to think that we don't necessarily have to plan African cities to look like European cities. Maybe there is beauty in the chaotic order that we currently have in many African cities. And maybe we need to be led by that in how we plan for and in what we do on the continent. So that for us was one very striking picture that we spent quite some time speaking about. Also was the idea of urban decay, the picture on urban decay where you had the woman sitting, and right there through the canal was all of that waste. And I think that one thing I took from the session, from that session, was the fact that there were these three pillars where you had the pictures of the three dictators right there. And that was very symbolic in the fact that they're overlooking or leading or this mass decay and everything that is going wrong in society. I had a rather pessimistic view of that particular image. I looked at the image from the perspective of everything that is wrong with or everything that is not going well for the typical African woman today. The fact that she's caught in this decay, she's caught in this situation. And if you looked at the look or the emotions that particular image evoked on the face of the woman, it was the fact that she seemed very hopeless and very despondent. And that's the situation of many African women today, caught in circles of poverty, nowhere to go, being ruled, quote and unquote, by these men who don't seem to understand that everything is falling to pieces and the cities and the country is decaying right from its very roots up. And I have to apologize, but I'm going into another session and I've been getting pings to join. now, so I would have to leave the discussion. I really, really apologize.
Thank you so much for me. Enjoy your next session.
All right, bye.
And then Paul, would you like to share with us your insights?
Well, I wasn't billed as a discussant up front, so nevertheless, it's a privilege to be in a room with many people I esteem and who I've spoken with about creativity and how to express that. And you know, this is very personal to me, this the photographic journey, because it's how I understood the world and part of how the city worked. And you know, when you're busy practicing photography, you know, you can spend some time fixating on one element, one aspect, one leaf, one shade of light, one, you know, and it gives you a very different sense of the detail and in a way the infinite nature of the city. So I think a lot of us have spoken about the banana market. I might just add my word there, which is the notion of emergence and something which is inaccessible to us often from the outside. I think this is going to be a practice at each of the festivals, is to bring people together around a set of images, and hopefully, I agree, we can do it in person the next, because it really does offer a completely different understanding of the city, you know, and is a visual representation that that there's no single truth or no single version of the city. And I think so much of our work is to be encouraging people to not think of the future, but think of futures and possibilities, and engage that and be excited by that. So I think that this is what these images represent to me, is tangling with different ways of being in the city, both very literally, the image of Nairobi Rush, we've got two people sitting and watching the traffic. And so this notion of the fast-paced city and the slow city, the distinction between the city with nature, the area with nature, and the built environment, those juxtapositions, those separatenesses, I think is really interesting. Yeah, so I'll pause there.
Thanks very much, Paul. I don't know if there's any additional participants who wish to add their own comments or thoughts over and above what our discussants have shared. Please feel free to unmute yourself, turn on your video if you can, and share with us. So if there is anyone, you're please welcome to share with us. But I wanted to, there were two things that I think were very interesting that came out of my group discussion, which links quite closely to what has been said already. So we looked, there was a group of images where the artists had painted these portraits on minibus taxis, and there was a series of like 6 of them, and as far as I know from the description, they're famous either artists or football players in the country or the region where they're from. And then there was this interesting question of allowing well, in Africa you would see this on public transport, and it's a form of expression, and maybe even a form of allowing people or advertise and marketing your own services in the public transport industry. And then we started to talk about the more Eurocentric, or what you see in terms of formalized transport systems that have their own sort of branding or look the same. And where do we sit in Africa in terms of what we want our transport systems to look like? Noting that the more freedom of expression that's on the vehicles then becomes more of a decentralized system versus something that's more centralized and provided by the government. That may also, there was a note to some transport systems having religious statements on them, and whether communities, all communities, can identify with the messaging that is coming from the local government, and how to create that uniformity and collective ownership over transport systems, and where to find the space between complete freedom of expression and what's dictated by our laws and regulations. So that I found very interesting. And then there was a lot, I think, also on the vibrant, colorful markets, the seemingly chaos, some points around where there were things of images of food. There were many more women in those images, whereas compared to some images around the celebration and the making of the fire in the more bottom right of the mural, there were a lot more males like engaging in those spaces, and how we create spaces, urban designers or practitioners, for these different activities, and where do we put them, and do they, if they are at the moment gender conforming, how do we break down those barriers and make them more accessible to more people, which I think has come out in some of the reflections shared by our discussants as well. So
right.
Yes.
Rehab raised a really interesting point about the murals drawn on the minibuses, which I thought was really interesting, which is, you know, worth us thinking about as different artistic media and how to internalize them. So I wonder if Rehab might share that, and I'd love to also hear from Chris, you know, what her take on the discussion was.
Sure, Paul. So I was saying that photographically speaking, the images here, it's very difficult for a photographer to depict another artwork, whether it is another photograph or another painting, because where does the photographer add their own perspective? It becomes more of a typographic documentation of another artwork. It doesn't become a photographic body of work, you know. So in this case, in the case of the graffiti on the buses, I mean, it's great that we're able to see the artworks that is coming from the locals, and sometimes you would even feel the identity of each bus driver and the type of graffiti that they have on their bus. But photographically speaking, these images are merely a basic documentation of another artwork. It doesn't become a photograph of itself, if I'm getting my message through.
Well, what I added to that, I mean, you know, I think the documentation of it is useful for us who don't get to be there, but I think being able to appreciate those faces close up as you are in transit, I think, is another way to appreciate. And so in a way, photography allows us to do it from afar compared to being there and accessing them in movement, if that makes sense from my side.
It also, there's an important point there about the difference between art as a documentary device and art and photography as an artistic device, right? And if you were wanting to lean into to photography as documentation and research that we would use, you wouldn't want to put aside examples of that photography that were depictions of other art, say. I love those pictures in particular because they were one of the few that that specifically leaned into pictures of culture as opposed to natural resources or other. It was an expression of culture in the pictures on the buses. I love those pictures.
I may come in with one last comment from me, but on a different picture, just picking up from what David has just said about bringing in culture, the one that depicts the good old days where there's different generations coming together, and the fire being symbolic as well of this transgenerational learning or transferring of knowledge from one generation to the other, and how important it is for our cities to make spaces for that to happen, so that the older generation feels part of the urban fabric as well, and not left out in the rural parts of a region. So just bringing that knowledge from the different generations into how we plan and how we create our urban spaces. Thanks.
That was an interesting collection too. Because there were two different photographic forms in it. One was the very clear portraiture with the families sitting together, and then there was one picture in that group where two people holding hands.
Yeah.
And the technique was very gauzy, and it spoke to the idea of these good old days, the nostalgia about this good old days that was somehow not out of reach. I don't know if that was an intentional thing, but what it read to me was this idea that the formal photographs were clear, but the holding hands and the idea of the good old days is not so clear. It's something that we've lost, or we can't see well anymore. Something that was beautifully gauzy about it.
Yeah, what we picked up there was that it's sort of the sun transcendence, like otherworldly, and the smoke is providing like a medium of communication between that other world and this one, and how we've lost that connection. Yeah.
A true winner indeed. That was the winner of the competition. Just for noting, if anyone didn't know. Chris, would you like to? Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, sure. So there are a couple of things that kept coming up for me when we were going through these images. And we were lucky enough to also have, I think, two of the photographers with us in the conversation. It was really nice to hear their reflections on each other's work, and to hear us discussing it about them. But I think one of the things, especially with Emmanuel talking about the banana market, was the story sort of behind the collection of images, and how it was partly a sort of a way of talking about what our values are, in choosing to document those things, and talking about the sort of excess of consumerism, and how we're just sort of struggling to make money and get by and sort of make a mark in the world, and how it's this sort of competition. And in that way, Emmanuel was sort of distilling, what are our values as a society, and making his own reflection on that. And the other thing was looking at some of the images, like the flooding images and things like that, is how photography is also used as evidence, as documentary evidence. It's, it evidences the things that are going wrong in our cities, and the things that are going right, the things that we have issues with, and the things that we hoped for. Like, for example, the really beautiful and futuristic images from Agathe Schatz, who was also there with us. It was very cool to speak about sort of what a future African city looks like, and how we can deal with the tension between all these dichotomies, the nature versus industry versus rich and poor, and all of those things. Yeah, those were some of the sort of things that came through most strongly for me.
Thank you, Chris. So before we close for the afternoon, because we've come to that point in the day, I do welcome you to, if you wish, to continue going through the photographs and adding comments if you'd like. I know our group did make it through all of the images, and there is a wealth of imagery there that is for us to be shared. But yeah, if there are any final comments before we close. If not, so if you joined our creativity session this morning, we ended the session with some reflections from the discussants, and we were left with this refrain, which I thought really stood out to what we're trying to do at RISE, and also is very clear coming out in this conversation around photography. So I'm just going to repeat it here for you. Probably not do it as in the same justice as it was done this morning, but I will try.
You can do it, Lauren. You can do it.
Cool. So it goes. Every story knows its teller. Every story has its time. Yours and mine has its place and time. It's time. So just to repeat that, every story knows its teller. Every story has its time. Yours and mine has its place and time. It's time. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. And in that call to action, enjoy the rest of the festival and have a wonderful day further.